that we'll get a chance to show that at another time. So I want to really first and foremost thank our presenters tonight and to thank our wonderful Shelley Lichtenstein, who's on the call. Thank her first, who as always is so helpful in arranging things of this import and keeping all of us on task until the job gets done. So our Hebrew School appreciates that, our community appreciates that, and I know every panelist tonight appreciates that about you very much. So Shelley, we thank you, and any words before I let you get comfortable in the attendee section?
Thank you, and thank the panel for doing this. We're just really excited about it. So thank you.
We're very happy to have you.
Welcome.
And so I want to begin and introduce our panelists for the evening. And really, this is an impressive group, so this might take a minute. And of course, I'm sure that everybody can probably see the names and everything underneath, but maybe as I say your name, if you can just give a wave. As it is right now, everybody should see all of our panels all together. So, whenever you raise your hand, they'll see you. So we're going to start with Dr. Brad, or as he likes to be known in our world, Bentzi Tepper, who has been davening happily at Temple Adas Israel since the late 1980s. And loves it that it's his spiritual home. So we love you back, Brad, I promise.
Thank you.
Bentzi is a double board certified general psychiatrist, as well as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, maintaining a robust private practice. Bentzi maintains an active teaching appointment as clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at the Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra University, Northwell. And in addition, Bentzi, for greater than the past 25 years, continues in his role as a supervising psychiatrist to senior residents, fellows in the Department of Psychiatry at LIJ-MC Hillside Psychiatric Hospital. So we welcome you, Dr. Brad Tepper, or Bentzi as we all know you around these parts, for being here this evening. And I'll introduce each one of our panelists first, and then each of them is going to have a chance just to begin by just giving a few minutes of their perspective on our sort of prompt for this evening. So welcome to Dr. Brad, and welcome to Bentzi. Next, we're going to go to Ari Weller, who, at least on my windows, is down there at the bottom, sort of like Hollywood Squares from back in the day. Ari Weller is the founder and lead trainer at Philosophit. For 25 years, Ari's been at the forefront of fitness, coaching clients with a focus on training smart for a longer, healthier, happier life. Ari's team of trainers at Philosophit are models of the method, which means that they know how to move consciously and with integrity, how to avoid injury, and how to recover from the unavoidable injury. In other words, maximum fitness with minimum wear and tear. Ari's philosophy revolves around what he calls the 6 fields of fit. It's trademarked, by the way, so nobody take this. Okay, this is stuff here. But
at least hashtag.
Even more important, I think. Recovery, mobility, core, stability, strength, and heart waves. These fields are the essential ingredients for improving fitness and helping people to live life to the fullest. As Ari states, no matter your fitness level, age, or physical abilities, the goal of Philosophit is to make the most out of each workout. To do that involves training equally in all of those 6 fields at every single session. So, and I can say this from personal experience, I just need to spend more time with him and his team. Yes, I should just say at this point that I think this entire program this evening was designed by Lou Geffen purposely just for Rabbi Dan to learn an awful lot of important matters, which is true. Okay, so Shelley as well. So Shelley and Lou together. And just to point out, which I didn't say at the very beginning, which is that Philosophit is located in East Hampton, and during even these times is working very hard, all of the team. So of course, as with all of our panelists, anyone who wants to have follow-up conversations with any of them, I'm sure that they will be as willing as their, let's say, business model allows in the easiest terms. But certainly, we welcome Ari and his wonderful Philosophit team and mentality and philosophy here to our conversation tonight. Next, we'll go to Ann Silver, and if you can just wave your hand. Ann is a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator, and is a nutritionist in private practice with over 25 years of experience on Eastern Long Island. Ann provides individual nutrition therapy virtually and in person for diabetes, weight management, eating disorders, and an array of medical conditions where nutrition has an impact. She is a participating provider with many insurance companies, including Medicare, and Anne is passionate about assisting individuals in attaining and maintaining health through food. So we welcome you to our panel this evening, Anne. Thank you so much for being here as well. And last but certainly not least, Dr. John Oppenheimer has practiced general internal medicine and geriatrics in Sag Harbor for 25 years. Prior to that, he worked for 10 years in the community medicine department at St. Vincent's Hospital in New York City. He has cared for many people with HIV infection and has been the doctor at the HIV clinic in Southampton for 10 years amongst his regular practice. So we thank you, Dr. John Oppenheimer, for being here as well. And as I think everyone can see, we are very lucky in our community to have such a diverse group of experts, each in their own field. And I think before we start and give an opportunity really for everybody to have their chance to speak, is just to explain that I think I'm responsible for something of a misnomer of this evening's discussion, that it was titled Health and Wellness in a Time of Pandemic. But as we discussed amongst ourselves, that actually that's extremely and unnecessarily limiting application of this conversation. That conversations around wellness are not ones to be determined only when the world has turned upside down on itself. That concepts and questions of wellness are things that have been at the forefront of each of our panelists' work for now decades, each of them collectively. And that tonight we are going to talk certainly with that as a backdrop, understanding that we live in the world that we live in and the time that we live in. But that I hope that the conversation will be something that each of us will take away, again, not just for this time, which we hope is temporal and limited, but really for the rest of our lives on a day-to-day basis. So not to put too much pressure on our panelists, but we hope by the end of the evening you will have solved all of our problems and we will all be experts in all of these things. But in all seriousness, one of the things that we talked about was just to give each of you a chance first, maybe just to introduce yourself in a little bit of greater depth and to give us a sense of who you are and what your practice is and what you can bring to this conversation tonight. So I'll now turn it over. I don't know who feels like going first. We have a intrepid leader.
Great.
I'll go.
Okay, Anne, thank you. I was going to start calling on people. You know.
Okay, I'll go. So good evening, everybody, and thank you to Shelley and to Rabbi Dan for putting together this panel, and also to my esteemed fellow panelists. Thank you. And I also want to thank all of you out there who are attending this healthy and wellness panel. So in a nutshell, what do? I teach people how to eat. I like to call what I do eating therapy. Doesn't that sound a little odd? Like we all eat, right? But you've probably been eating since you're an infant, right? You learn to open your mouth and the food was on the spoon and you ate and you probably wore some of it. But over time you started to feed yourself, which brings you to now. So you can ask, what's the big deal about feeding myself? I open my mouth and I put the food inside my mouth and I chew and I swallow, end of story. But over a lifetime of eating, we develop habits that influence eating that we may or may not be aware of. And especially during these trying times, you know, we could be experiencing more now and fall into perhaps what I would term as undesirable eating behaviors. Now, most individuals I find are most concerned with the actual foods that they are eating to achieve healthy eating. And they want to know specifically, what foods should I be eating to be healthy? And that certainly is an important component. However, it's not the only piece that I look at when I'm working with an individual about their eating. I'm going to look at, why do you eat? What are the reasons that you're eating? When do you eat? What time are you eating? How do you eat? How do you put the food in your mouth? Where do you eat? With whom do you eat? What else are you doing when you're actually eating? What are your thoughts about food? And eating, you know, and these are just some of the things that I could think of, you know, that questions that need to be answered, and there's more, but just some of the questions that need to be looked at when I talk to somebody about their eating behavior. There is no one diet, approach, or program that works for everyone. And I think all the panelists could probably agree in their own discipline that it's the same thing, that we all don't have just one approach, that an approach needs to be individualized to the person and to figure out what's going to work for them. My goal in what I do is to learn everything about the person in front of me to figure out together how we can achieve their nutritional and health goals. And I look forward tonight to answering any of the questions that anybody has about nutrition. And I hope that you do present some. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. That was a wonderful beginning. I really appreciate that. Okay, who's up next? Anybody, or I'll just call. Brad, would you mind going next?
I don't mind at all. Okay, so I'd like to start. Unfortunately, the organizations I belong to require a brief disclaimer, so I just need to read 2 sentences. That the information that I preside tonight is for educational, informational purposes only, and should not be considered as direct medical advice. And the information is not intended to replace medical advice offered by your personal physician. Whew, okay, got that done. Now, having said that, I'm not going to say much to get started. I'm going to wait for the question and answer period. What I would like to say is, or unfortunately I need to say, is that we are in a period of trauma and grief. The pandemic has turned life upside down for us, and it's unclear whether we're actually facing a new normal or we're really in a pause situation to return to something that we knew. That's not known. So in conversation and working with individuals, we have to think about stages of trauma and stages of grief and loss. And in that, I think we can find ways to actually help each other. The populations that are really most vulnerable at this time are those that lack sensitivity and safety, sense of sensitivity, I should say, and safety. And that would be mostly children, the elderly, and those with histories of mental illness. And if we keep that in mind as we think about ways to mitigate from a mental health perspective, the effects of this pandemic, I think we can help ourselves and each other. I'll pause at this point by saying probably the diagnoses that are most prevalent, that are becoming more and more prevalent from a mental health perspective currently throughout lifespan, are we're seeing greater increases in anxiety, depression, substance abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as suicidality and sadly completed suicides. So mental health needs to be discussed, needs to be addressed, and I'm glad we're doing that tonight.
Thank you for being a part of the panel, really. Dr. Oppenheimer, maybe we'll go to you next.
Thank you. Thank you, Shelley, and everyone else here. I thought you're probably saturated with COVID information, on the news, and I'm happy to answer specific questions. This is my second pandemic. I started my medical practice in the early 80s in Greenwich Village in the peak of the HIV epidemic. And I just want to give some perspective on COVID from having lived through that first pandemic. At that time, there was a lot of despair. There were no treatments. And, I think eventually, we're in that period now. We're in a period of despair. People there are no treatments really that are effective, except for a couple if you're really sick in the hospital and in the ICU on a ventilator. So I just want to start with a measure of hope that with time, we'll figure this all out. It doesn't seem that way right now, but it'll happen. The other part is, both diseases are totally preventable. HIV is preventable, with, safe sex, not sharing needles. Medicines are given to prevent HIV in men who have sex with men at high-risk behavior. And if they take it every day, they don't get HIV. HIV, we treat everybody so their viral loads are undetectable, so they can't transmit it to anyone else. So we know how to prevent HIV. We know how to prevent COVID. And I'm sure we're all kind of aware of the social distancing, masks, the different ways to do that. So, an ounce of prevention is, pound of treatment. I mean, it's so important right now, and it's so difficult to do, especially for a lot of older people who are self-isolating their home without their usual contacts, not seeing their grandkids, and it's really a difficult time for a lot of people. And then also in the context of epidemiology, we're seeing more people of color, overrepresented, people with COVID, just like HIV. New infections now, probably half are among people of color, blacks, whatever, 13% of the population, probably over half of new infections. So we also have to, we're in our own little bubble, but we also have to focus on all the people who may not have the same access to care, and how better to provide that care to people. And then last, the vaccine, it's been 40 years. Anthony Fauci was the guru 40 years ago, beginning of HIV, and he's the guru now. The vaccine for HIV has never come to be, for a lot of different reasons. And a lot of people think that the COVID vaccine will be a lot easier to achieve than the HIV vaccine. So, it's the $100 million question, or today's news, it's the $2 billion question. Yeah, if you're Pfizer. So that's that'll happen too, but who knows how long that's going to take. So that's that's the perspective that I like to give, that we've gone through different pandemics in the past, and we'll get through this one too.
Well, we certainly appreciate the message of hope, but of course tinged with the reality. So John, thank you for that. All right, Ari, Batten cleanup.
Okay. Well, you read my long bio, so I will spare the gory details, but I've been a fitness trainer for 25 years. I've, at last calculation, done over $100,000 hours of private sessions with people. When I first started my career, I was all about trying to get people to look good, including myself. And then you get a little older, and you get a little banged up, and you learn that, yeah, that's nice to have, but maybe what's more important, and I would say more than maybe, is that you teach people to move better. And so that, like you said, when I opened up Philosophy in 2013 in East Hampton, I said, what is the smartest stuff that I've ever known, and how do I build a system around that so that I can teach it to other trainers, and that they could to pass that on to other people as they come. And that became the 6 fields of fit, and you mentioned them. And what this means is that you have a balance around all these 6 fields. So you have recovery, which I can explain in detail later, but what recovery means, which each one of these actually means, because it may be more than you actually think. But recovery, mobility, stability, core, strength, and heart waves, which is really something called heart rate variability, which I'm sure some of the panelists know quite a bit about. I actually borrowed, for those budding Kabbalists in the crowd tonight, I actually borrowed a symbol from Kabbalah that has been in my intention behind Philosophy. This symbol here is an ancient Kabbalistic symbol. If it had 4 more spheres on it, 4 more fields, I used 6 of them. That is how the Kabbalists describe the Big Bang, which is called Tzimtzum, right? So the Big Bang theory. So that little Jewish intention has been in my business since the get-go. And the idea is that no matter what you're going to do, if you're going to go out and move today, and that's the main message that I try to bring all the time, move, get moving, right? But don't just get moving within balance in each one of the 6 fields. And really what it means is just pick one thing from each field that as you do a movement session, and then you'll have balance. Don't just go for a walk. Don't just stretch your body. Don't just do some core exercises. Don't just lift weights, but do a little bit of everything within that session. And really, it doesn't take more than 15, 20 minutes if you pick one thing from each category, and then you have balance. And then within that, balance is really the goal, to really bring yourself both physically and mentally back to center.
Well, all right, that's fantastic. And I think actually you already anticipated one of the questions, I think, for tonight, which, is a deep question, one that you can go as far down as you wanted to. But just sort of curious as to where, if anywhere, have you seen an intersection between your work and your field, the challenges that you have addressed in your opening remarks, and your personal understanding of your Judaism. In other words, has there been any overt or perhaps impact that you didn't necessarily realize years ago, but perhaps realize now? And if the answer is no, that is a perfectly fine answer. Also, this is not a rabbi's judgmental question, I promise. But I think just hearing what Ari was talking about, just curious as well. And Ari, if you have additional thoughts beyond what you've shared and you feel comfortable, it'd be great to hear.
Well, the joke around Judaism and sort of movement, as I've surely gone to other traditions to find good movement practices that are built into the traditions, and many have it. The Sufis have it, obviously the yogis have it, and many others as well. Even as traditions of having to walk great distances and bow down, continuing up and down as you walk this path all the way in this pilgrimage to this destination you must go. I kind of have the sense that as soon as we got to the promised land and walked for 40 years, that's it. We cut it off. We walked for 40 years, no more movement in this tradition. So that was, but that doesn't mean we can't bring it back.
I think we're very good at this particular movement, but I'm not sure how many calories
shuckling
that's
is good. Shuckling is good. And actually the truth of the matter is if you put a person on a force plate, a standing force plate, to see where they actually shift their weight, just standing and thinking they're standing still, nobody is actually standing still. On a force plate, you move all over the place. If you were to see the reading when you thought you stand still. So really you could say that, we're way ahead of the game on that. We just increased the size of that movement.
If there had only been a Fitbit around the time of Rabbi Akiva, who knows? Who knows what we would find? But that's great. All right. So John, Brad, and any additional thoughts from your own experiences? And again, only if it feels applicable.
Yeah, I just want to, other viruses, people are stressed out, they don't eat well, they're not fit, can bring out like herpes viruses. And, so I think it's great that you have the four of us together to balance it out. And I just think everything we're doing, these four disciplines is really important to stay healthy as well.
Great. And Brad or Ann, any comment in terms of the Jewish part of the equation? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question.
I think we can move on.
All right. So one thing that I think would be helpful, and I think this is the case whenever we're talking about a really big kind of idea or concept like the word wellness, is that I think defining key terms is essential to being able to get to what I think is another hope I think of this evening, which is getting into some practical some takeaways, some things that people can be doing in our community and at home to be helping to address some of their biggest wellness concerns. But maybe just if any of you have a thought about how you conceive of that word, and in particular within your particular discipline or field.
All right, I'm happy to kind of take it from my perspective. So in response to this crisis that we're in, I'm not sure it's really a great definition of wellness, but a way of responding and of trying to maintain hope and optimism for both children. I'm predominantly a child and adolescent psychiatrist, but for children and adults is to try to establish some sense of mastery and control, especially over a situation that feels overwhelming and where we don't have control. So I would encourage us to think about not so much as the futility of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, but much more as the benefit of planting one's own victory garden. And if we think about building a victory garden for ourselves, or even building even better, a community garden where we assist each other, I think that's a better metaphor in thinking about mastery and control. I would encourage each of us to do our best to be compassionate to each other, to ourselves and to each other, and to forgive small mistakes. Small mistakes and difficulties that we experience in each other are absolutely magnified in times of trauma. And I think we need to be much more forgiving. Remember that each of us are going through the same but different experience of trauma. I would encourage, and I would certainly support what my colleagues are saying, practice mindfulness, engage in meditation, yoga, deep breathing, things that will provide a sense of inner calm. I'll pause in a moment. I'll just say one more thing about adults, and then maybe a question will come up later about how to work with children. I'm happy to talk about that. But for adults, from a mental health perspective, I think of Viktor Frankl's work. Viktor Frankl was a very wonderful psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz and went on to establish a type of psychotherapy called logotherapy. And if you read Man's Search for Meaning, he really outlines it, where he defines the primary motivational force of the individual is to find meaning in suffering and meaning in life. So I think if we can take time to do these things during this pandemic, it'll help us feel much more toward wellness than despair.
Beautiful, Brad. Thank you.
I'll go
Anne?
next. So I think an important component in terms of eating during these times is having some type of routine. I think that many people are out of routine. They're not getting up, they may be getting up later in the day. They're not going to the office or to their workplace or to school. And so as a result of not having routine, we kind of lose our schedule with eating as well. And so I think developing, and this is what I'm working a lot with my patients, is developing a routine, some type of schedule with eating, exercise, doing mental health, doing yoga, doing meditation, looking at it in a comprehensive way and figuring in everything so that, and even perhaps at times thinking back to, well, what did you used to do? What time did you wake up before we had stay at home and we're mostly at home? How could we reproduce that? You know, maybe waking up a half an hour later instead of, I mean, I was talking to someone today, waking up at noon. Instead of waking up at noon, what about 9 o'clock? You know, like just trying to get more into some type of schedule that kind of works. Like, you know, people need boundaries, and I think a schedule or routine helps that.
I think that seems to be extremely important, and I think it's an important aspect, which I think my guess is relates to all four of your fields and really applies to each and every one of us. That, you know, we are generally speaking creatures of habit and creatures of process. Some of the work, I imagine, for all four of you is in some cases undoing some of that process when it is unhealthy. But even for those who pre-pandemic felt like they had a pretty good sort of routine in place, that as soon as the world changed as it did, I imagine that there's a lot of work just getting back to sort of a reset position. So I think that this is all extremely important, and I think John, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add on this
Well, all right. So I come from hard science. Okay, you do double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, vaccines, treatments, and you see what works or not. I think everybody, when they read the news, is getting a sense of how science works. I think some of the softer sciences represented here doesn't mean they don't work. You know, it's just that hard to prove. It's so hard to do studies to show some nutritional approach works or physical or mental health. It's just really hard, impossible to do. But I think a lot of common sense interventions are really important. You just can't prove it, but I think, you know, from my perspective, what I do is we need the hard science to support, you know, whatever is recommended right now.
So one thing, you know, that I've been thinking about a lot, and I imagine that each of you has had a different experience about this, but really that all of your work, generally speaking, is meant to be really done face to face, right? The people that you're used to working with are in the room with you, and you therefore have your full skill set at bear. Could you maybe talk about, you know, some of the unique challenges that you've been facing, and maybe if you've had anything that you have learned from the experience of being limited that you will take forward with you, that God willing, again, we get back to some degree of normalcy? Is there anything that you have changed or adapted to that you think will be enduring, I guess, past this period?
I'll go first. So as part of training people for 25 years, there's a lot of moving around for me usually. And we immediately shifted to a virtual format with the work we do. We were very lucky that we do one-on-one with people. And this format is actually very intimate with one-on-one as it is in person. And so I was as surprised as anyone how wonderful it actually ended up becoming. And I think many of Clients feel the same way. I don't think anyone that tried it has stopped doing it since this began. I'll say a couple things about it. One, I know what it's like to have an office job, because in the beginning of this, I was sitting on my tuchus the whole time, having these sessions, and I started to have issues. And now, though I've lowered the desk for this, because it's time of the day that I want to chill out, I use a standing desk now. I have, massage tools that I'm standing on all day long. I'm massaging myself while I'm in sessions, but I've moved into understanding a little bit better of some of the people that I actually see on a daily basis and what they had to deal with maybe before this with sitting a lot and things like that. The other thing I'll say is that it's made me, and I've talked to other colleagues about this as well that are going into this format as well, that are stuck in this format as well. It's made us better. It's actually made us better at what we do because we're hyper-focused. I can see everything that I need to see with the technology the way it is. I can see toe grabs, hip shifts, shoulders up, you name it, and I can call those out. And again, that was one of the things that surprised me, that I was actually able to do it. And in a way in which I was more focused than the distractions that may be in a studio, somebody calling, somebody walking in the door, somebody trying to get my attention as the owner of the studio, that kind of thing. It's just me and this person in this format. So I'm going to definitely take that with me, that the ability to see, it's made my eyes better. And I do pride myself on being able to read a body and being able to see what's missing and then be able to give that body back that movement again somehow. So I will be taking that with me, for sure. Those
Awesome.
things.
It's awesome, Ari. Thank you. Look, I think everything that you indicated before about the entire philosophy underneath the philosophy and the idea of balancing all of these different elements, right? Sometimes things are going to be a little bit out of balance that aren't in your control. So some of the ways that we compensate by that are leaning a little bit more heavily on places that perhaps we took for granted. So, I mean, I love that. That's a high holiday sermon right there about being able to see differently. I love it. Ari, you're up. Okay, you got second day Rosh Hashanah. It's you. Any other thoughts from our other panelists?
Well, yeah, I'll speak about it. I like all of us, I've had no choice but to move to telehealth to conduct psychotherapy sessions. Since I work with kids and teenagers, I'm not so great at video anything, computer anything, so they teach me. And when I don't know which button to push, they say, hey, Tepper, hit this button and that button, and the thing works fine. But I'll tell you, it's a poor substitute. In the world that I live in, the important experience of being with a patient is establishing a holding environment. And that is much more than just visual and auditory. There's a whole felt experience being in a room with somebody and giving them that sense of comfort and being held. So although it's a substitute, and that's what we have to use at this time, and I certainly am doing it all day long, I do look forward to get back to the office with my patients.
I appreciate the honest assessment, Brad, and I think we can all understand, and I'm sure that that your patients will be anxiously awaiting that as well. And anything else?
So I was doing virtual actually before the pandemic. I was doing some of it when patients couldn't make it into the office. And so when, the pandemic started, I was like, all right, I'm stepping right into this. I was already set up for it. Like Ari, I found that I was sitting a little too much. And I was thinking maybe I need a 2-hour lunch break and go take like a long walk for an hour. But just as I was saying earlier about getting into a routine, I myself was out of my exercise routine. And what I realized just, like as I spoke earlier, that I needed to get back into my schedule. But, and I relate to what Brad's saying is that I kind of miss not being in the room, because when I'm counseling, I look at the way that somebody's talking to me. Like I use my hands a lot when I'm talking. I say I'm always burning calories, even when I'm talking, because I'm always moving. And so, and I'll notice that, with some patients that, I need them to burn more calories. The only thing that's moving is their mouth. And sometimes I can't really see, like, you could only see me from my chest up, where we could see Ari a little bit further. I want to see their whole body. I mean, I have had patients do a 360 for me to kind of get a sense, because I don't normally weigh patients anyway. I mean, because the scale is only one parameter, but I have adapted. And it's really interesting because when this all started, and and I'm constantly getting new patients, and unfortunately they have to wait to get appointments. And the week that I decided that I was not going into the office anymore, I had like a handful of new patients, and they're all, most of them were older, and they said, well, we're going to wait. I'm going to wait until things go back to normal. Well, this is our new normal for the temporary, hopefully, that it's only temporary. And I had my assistant get in touch with these people again and say, this is how Anne is handling seeing patients. And all of them actually did come back. And actually, I'm finding that now patients are really appreciating it, that they could do it out of the convenience of their home. For me, when someone's talking about a food item, I'm like, could you go in the kitchen and go get it? Can you show me? And it's really interesting because this morning, this person with diabetes who's on an insulin pump who's telling me about these bran muffins and how she was counting them, the carbohydrate. And I said, go get the nutrition label. No, there's no nutrition label. I said, there has to be. And sure enough, there was, and she was miscalculating. And now we know why her blood sugars are really high. But if I was in the office, even though I went to BJ's to go look at them online, they had no nutrition label. So there's definitely for me, some benefits. And I'm actually thinking now going forward, because one of my offices closed, NYU closed one of my offices and they have no space for me. So I'm actually might be looking for space. I haven't decided quite yet. I have an offer, but I'm like, maybe I want to do this. Maybe this is like really the state of the art now, that we do healthcare through telemedicine, that we do it online, telehealth, virtually, and that might really suit the needs of many people, that especially getting out of the house could be difficult, for a variety of reasons. But we'll see. The future will tell us.
No, I think that's, again, very helpful insights, Anne. And of course, having the ability to see a person's life in their home and potentially some of the things that may be hidden in the meeting. I can't think of anybody who might do that in a doctor's appointment or relevant thing like that, where you may say one thing to the person in front of you and then home there might be hidden objects of sorts. So, but again, I think I appreciate most of all is a sense of adaptation and a realization that, you can't control necessarily what the environment is. So what can you take away? So, Anne, thank you for those contributions.
But I have to add one thing. Like, it's really cute. Like, the husband will come in the screen and say, she's lying to you. I'm telling you what she's really eating.
If Lou didn't have to take the dog for a walk right now, she would have most definitely been in the back of this conversation, I'm sure. So, John, any thoughts on this question? Otherwise, we'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, before I went back to the office, it's remarkable how much you can do over the phone, especially if you know the person. And then, when I have been back to the office, I sort of enjoy it more, to actually see people and have that contact. It's difficult seeing people with masks on. It's difficult for them and for myself. Right now, I'm trying to catch up and catch up with checkups, and because no one knows what the fall's going to bring and whether that's going to shut us down again. So I'm really trying to be proactive and get people in and do the stuff they need to do right now.
It's unfortunately prudent but thoughtful. There's really no other choice. So I do have one pre-submitted question I want to get to in a second, and I just want to remind our attendees, if you have any questions for our panelists that you'd like to put into the chat, I think there even is a specific QA function, whatever is easiest for you. But I thought actually, since we have Brad here and Brad's work, especially being with children, not knowing necessarily whether our attendees are immediately impacted by this, perhaps it's more a question of other family members or grandchildren. But I think that one of the things, speaking from the generation of parents, especially with small kids, of sort of trying to give any sense that you can, and I know this is a broad question, of things for us to be looking for, aware of. It's sometimes hard to know from a psychological perspective what's going through the mind of a 4.5 or a 5-year-old. And I know that you see a range of ages, but are there any things that you think for the layman that are helpful for us to keep our eyes on in terms of mental health, especially right now, especially as as so many unknown things are swirling, especially around school and things of that nature. So I
Absolutely.
realize it's an amorphous question, but
No, it's a very important question, and I think I'll take it in two parts. I'll answer the first part directly. So the thing that would be very important to look at when you take a look at children and adolescents is you look at their developmental stage, and during periods of trauma, you be very attuned to regression. So for instance, if a 4-year-old has been successfully trained in toileting, bowel and bladder, and now you're finding this youngster is urinating at night or in the daytime is having wet underwear, that's a sign that you have to, once they've been trained, you have to be concerned of what that's about. If you have so you take a 4.5-year-old, you take increasingly clinging behaviors, refusing to separate when they've been able to separate. Again, so we're taking a look at a regression. If they've not achieved the developmental milestone, then that's a different story. Some kids are slower, some 4.5-year-olds aren't trained, and that's, fine, they get there when they get there. So the primary thing that I would look at is regression of falling off a developmental curve. One thing that we can do to be really helpful to our kids look at us as adults, our caretakers, basically as a barometer of well-being. Children don't read the news. They don't watch television unless we force it upon them. But they look at us for their sense of safety, sense of security, and well-being. If we can present that to our kids, even in times of trauma and grief, they'll be okay. But if we ourselves are falling apart around them, and that's why maintaining our own mental health is so crucial. If we maintain our sense of mental health, we can help them with theirs. I agree with what Ann said before. I think we need to establish for our children a sense of structure and routine. It's far too easy right now for our 4-year-olds and our 14-year-olds to sleep till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. As unpopular as it sounds, and my patients aren't thrilled with this, I encourage parents to get their kids up at a regular time every day and put them to bed at a regular time every night, including the teenagers. Establish that routine. Give them chores, give them responsibilities. Make them feel that their input and what they do is meaningful to the household, that they have a sense of well-being and reinforcement in a positive way. I'll have more to say a little bit later about that, but that's like the basic. And one other thing I will say, actually, the news. I just want to touch upon this because that's really not understood unless you really work with kids a lot. After the tragedy of the World Trade Center, many children developed PTSD, not immediately after the attacks, but after being shown ongoing news clips again and again and again. What happened is that children at a certain development age don't have the capacity or don't have the mental capabilities yet to understand what's current and what's past. So every time they saw the World Trade Center falling down, they thought it was happening new. So from that, PTSD developed in many young children. So I will implore and encourage as many parents as possible to please turn off the news. Watch it yourself. Take a 5-minute day to get caught up. But watching the endless news cycle of the count of death is not only detrimental to your own mental health, it's devastating to your children.
Thank you. I think obviously I have a certain horse in the game, as they say, and this is extremely helpful. And realizing again that some of the things, especially each of you in your own disciplines, that you have the eye, you've trained, as Ari was talking about, that you can see certain things that the rest of us can't. That I think, especially when it comes to mental health issues, especially for young people, that a lot of us as parents, I'll just put in the eye, just don't feel immediately equipped to notice those kinds of changes. And I think you gave some very practical examples that I will certainly keep close to my attention. And for those of you, again, that have any young children or children in the range that we're talking about here, that is extremely helpful information, I think, for them. So thank you. So I think, using that as a springboard, and certainly I know, Ann, John, and Ari, I'm sure that in your times that you have also worked with young people. So please, by all means, jump into this conversation at this point. And if not, there is a question, as I said, that was sort of pre-submitted, which I think is going to propel us towards the latter part of our conversation tonight, which is taking it from, forgive me for lack of a better term, from the philosophical or the theoretical to, particularly practical, right? For those that are watching tonight and those that will watch at home, knowing, again, the limitations that we have, for example, just not being able to get to a gym, right? What do we do when the normal mechanisms that we have aren't there, and what can we be doing, especially for those of us that are really perhaps staying at home almost exclusively, to maintain wellness in each of the fields that we are talking about with each of you. So I want to start by asking the pre-submitted question, which is pretty specific, but I'm hoping from it will broaden out, which is just basically to say helpful advice that you would helpful advice to suggest to our listeners that will help them, especially during the pandemic, to maintain as much as possible a state of wellness and a protection around their own wellness. So I'll just read the submitted question, and then you can answer this one directly or answer it as you will. And this one comes from one of our members, from Debbie. And so she says that she's a teacher, and with school reopening as a potential and getting closer, she's increasingly feeling a bit panicked about going back to teach her kindergarten class, and of ultimately getting the virus herself, or just as bad, potentially bringing it home and giving it to her husband. She is now 59 and he's 69. So she's an avid runner, which usually she said helps her with this anxiety, and a lot of her concern really is not just sort of how to limit things, but what the impact is on a mental health standpoint, right? So normally running helps her with that anxiety, but it's not doing what it normally does for her. So do you have any tips, anything that you can suggest on a practical level that can help her in terms of preparing for returning to work, and while she ultimately may have to return to work, that need?
I mean, I'll take the runner first there. What I would say to Debbie is follow the 6 fields of fit, right? First thing that has to happen in recovery, you need to breathe. So I would be recommending that before she goes out on that run, and if running is her thing, we don't want to change that. That is her passion. That has been her shul. Then let's just make that better. Let's find that again. Let's find that passion that run used to give her. And the first thing I would do is I would be doing lateral breathing. I would teach that diaphragm not to just go down into belly breathing, but breathe sideways. So you get the diaphragm to activate more, which brings in more oxygen immediately. The second thing I would do is I would think of any muscle that has to happen in that run, whether it be quads, glutes, or hamstrings. And I would stretch them out with strength, which is a whole nother story. And then I would do stability. If she goes out on a half an hour run, let's just for practical purposes say she's pretty fast, but let's say she takes 10,000 steps in that run. That's 10,000 times she stands on one leg. So what I would be doing is I would be warming up with stability by standing on one leg and doing one leg drills. I'd had something that I call the clock exercise. I have a lot of YouTube videos on the Philosophy YouTube channel. Then I would actually do a core exercise that applies to running, right? So plank exercise that most people think it's horizontal, you're in forearm plank. That's actually what's happening when you're vertical. We're in plank, all of us sitting here right now, if we're sitting up straight, we're in an actual plank, right? But with the intention, the kavanah, that she's leading herself to that run right now. The next thing I would do is I would warm up those legs with a little bit of strength. Most people overuse their hamstrings and don't use their glutes when they're running. So I would tell her to do some exercises for her glutes to activate them, especially after the hamstring stretch. And then we're in the 6th field of fit already, which is the heart rate variability and the heart waves. Now she heads out onto that run. So it's almost like sometimes when you're getting dressed for something special, right? And then by the time you're done putting yourself all together, you move into that event looking your best. So most people just like, oh my gosh, I got. But let me tell you, what I just said takes 5 minutes, maybe less, to lead her into that run. And I think if she has the intention and leads into a balanced approach to that run, she may find that relationship with the run again.
I think that's fantastic. And I think especially one of the most important things that you said is our tendency sometimes is when whatever was working stops working, that our natural response is look for something else. And what I think you're saying is really be very careful about that kind of concept, that you already have that passion, and it's really actually just about maybe needing to rethink not just the end result, but the entire process leading up to it, which, one of the things I've learned from knowing you over the years, Ari, is that the preparation piece is just so key. And it's the part that I think is most often overlooked, and I'm as guilty as the next. And that really, I think that's great practical advice, both for Debbie specifically, but I think really actually for all of us, and to not lose sight of that fact, and to consider, I think, all of the stages, not just as I said, the end result or even the during, but think about the process leading up to. All right, it's great. Any of the other panelists want to jump in on this?
Well, it's a mental health question, and it's a really difficult one. Debbie, I wish I had a more helpful answer, because I've been thinking about this a lot. It's a question that's coming up tremendous amount among children going back, the question about children going back to school. Children absolutely need to be in school. Children absolutely need to be in an environment with other children. That's part of appropriate health and development. But I have to really listen to what John said earlier about hard science. Psychiatry really is that interface between soft and hard sciences in many ways. But in this regard, I fall back on the hard science. I'm very concerned about Debbie and her experience and her husband's exposure to little kids. 5-year-old kids are not going to be that particularly adept in understanding of wearing masks. I'm not saying they won't, but it's going to be difficult. I think in this case, if I were Debbie, I would be turning to my principal. I would be asking what factors are you as a school district doing to mitigate this virus, to protect me and my pupils? And I'd want to have an answer. I'd like to know what kind of disinfectant, how often they're doing that. Are they putting up shields? How are they establishing rules around masks? I don't know. It's too easy for me to say, well, you'll be okay, because I don't know the answer. And I think that we don't want to be cavalier and say, just go back to school. We also don't want to just isolate our children. I don't know whether, John, you have something that you can help us with regarding the science around this, but I agree with you. If people aren't wearing masks and washing their hands and socially distancing, this isn't going away.
Yeah, I think I would, hear Debbie's concerns and, just make sure that she understands how she can best protect herself too. I think Brad's points are great. And then, some people, really need something more than that. I mean, there's a pill for everything. And, I don't know, Debbie, I'm not sure what she needs, but I have been prescribing more because it's a very, very difficult time. And sometimes, something is more is needed to help people.
Extremely helpful answers. And I know actually that Lou was talking about this with me before, but sort of realizing that there has been for a long time a sort of tendency that when there is question of anxiety, especially, that the immediate response is one of prescription remedy, right? In other words, that there is a sort of direct brain chemical related approach, which may or may not be helpful. But the point is that the question is really sort of holistically speaking. Can we identify other things that can be done? As Ari actually already gave a great indicator in terms of breathing and breath, for those that have been part of our mindfulness class over the last few weeks and the impact there. But is there anything else that from a non-prescription basis that you would recommend as let's say approaches to how to lower anxiety around any issue related to depression and anxiety to this particular time?
I don't know if that's to me, but I think Ari and Brad, spoke well about different ways to do that, without any medication or anything like that. So I don't have anything to add from what they said.
Great.
I mean, if you could put the benefits of exercise in a pill, we'd all be waiting in the biggest line in the world to get it. So.
We'd probably end the night on that comment alone, I think would probably be something for us to consider. So, as we're coming up on it's close to an hour at this stage, and as far as I can tell, I haven't seen any submitted questions. So again, please, if anybody has anything to submit. But I thought maybe as we look towards the end of our program tonight, and realizing that of course we would never be able to touch on everything, each one of you probably we could have used an hour with individually. But I was hoping that at the very least, each of you would take an opportunity at the end, to impart whatever message you feel would be most needed to be heard. Again, from your either personal experience, your lens, what you've been going through yourselves. To use this as I guess I would say your Drosh opportunity, your teaching opportunity, and to try to leave us with at least a little bit of your wisdom. And for those of you that are in a practice in which you are welcoming of people into your world, also maybe just give a word about how best to reach you and to contact you about maybe getting involved in whatever it is that you are offering. I know that may be different for our doctors in the room, but Anne and Ari, perhaps if you could just give us a sense of how to reach you if you're so inclined.
Okay, I'll go first. Unless, do you want to go? So I was going to say self-care, because that's really what we're all talking about, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical activity, whether it's going to see your primary care doctor, or whether you're coming to see me for nutrition, that it's really about each of us, no matter who we are, really looking at ourselves and making sure that taking care of ourselves is first and foremost. In order for us to take care of the world, our families, whoever else around us, we have to put the oxygen on ourselves and take care of ourselves. Whether, it's eating regularly throughout the day, making sure that you're getting a lot of vegetables. I mean, and we're living on the eastern end of Long Island where the farm stands have a lot of produce now. I mean, not like in March and April where, it was very difficult to get food, fresh food. So I think taking advantage of that, maybe freezing stuff, thinking to the future, in relation to what, John, you were saying, I think thinking to the ahead, and that in the event that there is another flare-up, which could potentially happen, to start thinking about, from a food standpoint, how could I be more prepared than I was maybe in March or April? Are there things that I could bring into my home that are non-perishable, that, during another period where there's such limitations on obtaining food, that I could do this. I think that that's an important thing as well. In terms of getting in touch with me, I mean, you could Google my name, Ann Silver, nutritionist, and you will see my website. I'm sure it'll come up in a lot of different ways. You could also email me. My email address is pretty simple. It's Ann Silver, RD, for registered dietitian @gmail.com. And I just want to thank everybody again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Anne. That was great. Okay. Anybody feel like going next?
Sure. Brad, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Ari.
It's too nice.
Sure. So I would say that, in my belief is that social isolation is toxic to the human condition. And what we're going through in a pandemic, as it's affecting all age ranges, is unfortunately just that. This quarantine is toxic. So we have to think of ways of competing and beating that. So I'd say, irrespective of one's age, social contact is, I don't know if it's curative, but it's certainly important in wellness. I would encourage everyone who's listening to make sure that a day does not pass that you're by yourself and haven't reached out to someone. And if there's someone out there that is alone and isolated, please reach out to them. A phone call, dropping food off. Anne's correct. There's plenty of food out there now in the farm stands. Taking care of each other is imperative. When it comes to children, I would say that let's do our best to structure some kind of fun within the family. I would absolutely encourage families to establish a family fun night every single week, at least once a week, and make it inviolable. You must have it. If it's Wednesday from 7 to 9, you do it. And everyone each week can choose a different theme that you participate. I don't care what game you play. Another night might be a family food night where you create a meal that comes from a different part of the world. We've been doing that in our family every Friday night. We have our Shabbos dinner and we welcome a new culture in. We've done that now for 18 weeks. Make something fun to look forward to and create it together. And the kids will find some routine and happiness around that. And that's what I would suggest. Look for hope and encourage it and make it yours.
Great. And next thing we need is the Tepper family cookbook to associate with all of this.
You have my wife and my daughter and my son, not me.
All right. Ari, you want to go next?
Sure. So, when I do an assessment and somebody comes in for the first time, whether it's virtually or in person, first thing I want to see is their feet. I want to see their feet because in your feet you have 33 joints and 26 bones. That's 66 joints in your 2 feet alone. That's more joints anywhere else in your entire body, right? And if those joints are not really moving and doing what they're supposed to do, well, now it affects your ankles, your knees, your hips, your spine, your shoulders, and all the way up to your neck. So ultimately, your neck problem could be coming down from down in your feet, right? But I can't fix your feet from your neck, but I can fix your neck from your feet, right? So the bottom line is get your feet moving, right? COVID accepted exercise is to get outside and go for a walk. And there's nothing more programmed into our DNA as human beings than getting on 2 feet and walking. So, you know, if you're not somebody that, maybe you're somebody that practiced it and then it got hot, you know, and you stop now, there's no excuse. You go early, you go late. You know, there's a lot of reasons why walking is probably the best form of movement, period. There's not a joint that doesn't move the way it's supposed to move in gait pattern, which is why it's so essential to actually assess somebody's gait pattern. So I think it's been great in this COVID times. There are more people out walking around in my neighborhood for sure. And I think other neighborhoods for sure. And I would say, you know, get out there and get moving. That's the number one thing that we should all be doing every single day. So
It's great. And I think I'll use this.
if you want to find me, you know, it's philosophit.com. And, you know, if you want to contact us directly, info@philosophit.com. And we currently are doing private sessions for both private training, fitness training. We also do Pilates. We also do gyrotonic, all of those privately. And then we do have Pilates classes, both mat classes virtually, and also if people do happen to have a Pilates reformer at home, we do reformer classes at home right now too. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Ari. And I'll use this also as a chance to pitch another mitzvah, which is affected the Weller family and the Geffen family, which is if you want to get walking, call up ARF, and they will be happy to connect you with a wonderful pet and a dog who can walk with every single morning, rain or shine, evening. And, you know, Lou was just doing that just now. So big pitch for that, and a big pitch for Ari Weller and for Philosophit. And
Thank you so much.
know,
Thanks for having me.
I don't think I will ever think about my feet quite the same way again. But I in all truth, right, this is a time where I've been looking at it from a Jewish perspective, as sort of saying, like, now is the time to go to foundational texts, foundational ideas, foundational principles, get our feet back under us, so to speak, spiritually. So I love that idea as well. It's really great. All right, so Dr. John, we're going to we'll give you the last word, and then we'll say goodbye. But
I don't have that much to add more than what's said. I just want to recognize the obvious. It's a very difficult, very challenging time, and we will get through this.
That's why we end on optimism, right? That's
Yep.
our tradition, is that even in the bummer readings of the Torah or the Haftarahs, that they're supposed to end with what's called an Nechemta, right? A comforting message. And I think, John, that certainly that is a comforting message. And I think all four of you have given us, or at least I can just speak for my.
You lost your sound.
We can't hear you.
This is probably, I can think of how many times that's happened lately. All of that was just to say, all of the things I just said were beautiful and wonderful things about all four of you. But in truth, that's actually what I was saying. But really, thank you for making the time tonight, and thank you for all the work that you do, each in your own fields, in your own communities, wherever you are, and for being part of our Temple Adas Israel community for long before I and Lou and all of us were privileged enough to come into this world. You guys have been taking care of our community in the East End, and please know our gratitude really for all of us on the call tonight, all those that will watch this. And I think the takeaway for all of us is, it's as Brad said, let's be compassionate towards ourselves, let's be compassionate towards each other. Let's all work together in our own way towards a better state of wellness, both inside and outside. And certainly for whatever they can do, I'm sure all four of our panelists tonight will be happy to try to help as best as they can. So really, thank you all again for being on tonight. Thank you to our panelists, and hope to see you again very, very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Right.